Shalom, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you this evening, beginning a brand new series in Halakha that I called Kosher Curiosities. Kashrut, kosher, is a very large part of our life, our everyday living as a Jewish person. And there are so many questions that come up with regards to kashrut and kosher that I get asked all the time. And I felt it would be appropriate to give a class weekly, Bezrat Hashem, a short class online, 30 minutes, to have everybody here, learn a little bit about why we do certain things, and also remove certain misconceptions about kashrut that many are unaware of. And I figured that through this medium we can attract and attach ourselves to as many people as possible. And Bezrat Hashem, we will learn lots going on from this point forward. I called it Kosher Curiosities because that's what it is. Much of kashrut is a curiosity. Many times we do things that we don't even know why we're doing it. And a lot of people, again, have questions that they ask, and they do things by rote. And I think it's important to know the reasons behind certain things that we do and to learn as well. For that reason, I'm not just going to speak ad hoc. I'm actually going to read and learn from a sefer, from a book, especially for our Israeli or Hebrew-speaking audiences, that they can hear the words in Ivrit as well. I'm going to focus on the sefer called Peninei Halakha, which I am very fond and have taken a liking to. Rabbi Eliezer Melamed is one of the great poskim, one of the great halachic decisors of the generation. His set Peninei Halakha is the most sold Hebrew Jewish set or Torah set in the world. And he has, he's a tremendous Talmid Chacham. And the information that he actually writes in his book often is novel and very eye-opening. So Bezat Hashem, I anticipate this class to take some time. There is no rush. We'll go through it in the winter time, throughout the winter, and maybe even continue it as we get into the spring and the summer. Hashem. And again, short 30 minutes, Bezrat Hashem, to gain more knowledge on this idea of kashrut. Tonight, I actually would like to begin with the first topic, which I called tonight's class, Should I Be a Vegetarian? Vegetarianism or veganism, or they're not exactly the same, but they're very close. It has kind of taken the world by storm. You can see now vegan restaurants, vegan buffets. You go to certain places and they have a vegan only section. This is actually something that we're going to see was a thing once upon a time, and for many of us who are used to eating meat and chicken throughout the days of our week, especially on Shabbat and Yom Tov, this actually has some application because, as we're going to see, once upon a time this was not the case. So without further ado, we're going to begin tonight's shiur, Should I Be a Vegetarian? And we're going to read from the sefer of Peninei Halakha. For those that are online on an internet, you can actually access the Peninei Halakha series for free online in Hebrew. And there are certain volumes of his that you can find in English as well, translated in even Spanish and Russian. However, this one, I believe, this section on kashrut is only, until now, only written in Hebrew. It has not been translated yet. So let's begin. And Bezat Hashem, this will be, I think, part one of the vegetarian conversation that we're going to have. So let's look what he says over here. We're in his sefer called Kashrut Aleph Hatzomech Ve'achai, chapter Yudalet, called Achilat Basar, which is the eating of meat. And part one of this chapter he calls Heter Achilat Basar, the permissiveness to eat meat. And he begins as follows: Mitechila, in the beginning, Hakavana Haita Shemachalo Shel Adam Yeh Min HaTzomeach. So he begins by saying that right at the start of creation, that God's intent was for man only to eat from the tzomeach. Tzomeach is our leaves, our greenery that is tzomeach, that sprouts from the ground. That's all we were allowed to eat. Shne'emar, he quotes a pasuk in Parshat Bereshit at the opening of the 7 days of creation. Vayomer Elohim, God said, Hine natati lachem et kol esev zorea zera. That here, behold, I have given to you all the greenery that is planted. asher al penei kol haaretz, that is throughout on the face of the earth, ve'et kol ha'etz asher bo peri etz, and all trees that have fruit, zorei hazara lachem yeh leochla, that is for you to eat. So this pasuk clearly teaches us that at the start, when God created the world, what we were supposed to eat was only greens, was only vegetables, only things that grew from the ground or came from trees. Aval ba'alei chayim, animals, living things, ne'esru al ha'adam ba'achila. These were prohibited to be eaten by us. This is quoting a Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin. Vekatvu mefarshim, and the mefarshim, the commentators explained, shegam hachayot histapku az beminet someach velo tarfu zo et zu. In the way back when Hashem created the animals, even the animals only were allowed to eat from the tzomeach, from that which grows from the ground, and they did not attack or eat one another. That was not something that they did. As much as we see today in African safaris, and we see lions attacking and cheetahs attacking and all these things, and eagles coming and crouching on their prey. This was something that did not happen at the start of creation. So what happened? Ulam, he explains, hachataim gavru, sins increased, v'ha'olam kulo hitkalkel, and the world began to self-destruct. Zeh hitchil bechet'o shel Adam harishon. This began with the sin of Adam. Shebe'ito goresh migan Eden v'nigzera mita alav ve'azaro, where he was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and now because of that sin, from eating from the tree, death had been decreed on the world. Ve'af ha'adama nafla mimadregata, even the earth itself fell from its high state. Ve'chela leotzi kotz ve'dardar, and now the earth, which was only supposed to be giving off amazing, good, luscious fruits and vegetables, now is beginning to give off thorns and thistles. Acha onesh lo hovil le'afakat lekachim, but the punishment did not lead to any type of musar lessons or something for us. What happened? Cain ratzach et Hevel achiv. Cain, which was Adam's son, killed his brother Hevel. Bedoro shel Enosh, in the generation of Enosh, nechdo shel Adam harishon, the grandson of Adam, hechelu lachto ba'avodah zara, they started worshiping idols and committing idolatry. Ve'achar kach gavru achataim bagezel ni'uf ve'retzach, and everybody else just sunk into sins of theft and adultery and murder. Bemakbil lechata'im shel bnei ha'adam, in parallel to these sins of mankind, gam tiv'an shel hachayot hafach le'etom ve'achzari yoter, even the nature of the animals began to be more opaque and more cruel. Vehen hechelu litrof zu et zu, and they began to eat one another and attack one another. Ad shenigzera keliyah kol basar. At this point, Hashem decided that all living things need to be wiped out. Shnei emar, as the pasuk says, "Vatishachet haaretz lifnei haElohim, vatimale haaretz chamas." This is the beginning of Parashat Noach, where the land itself began to destroy itself, and the land was filled with robbery. Vayar Elohim et haaretz ve'inen nishchata. God looked at the land and he saw what was going on, and he couldn't believe it. Ki yishchit kol basar et darko ala haaretz, because all flesh have sunk and be destroyed to the lowest levels. Vayomer Elohim leNoach, this is when Hashem commanded Noach and said, Ketz kol basar ba lefanai, ki malea haaretz chamas mipenehem. The end of flesh and blood has come because of the Hamas, because of the cruelty and the robbery and the horrible things that the world has turned into. Ve'ineni mashchitam et haaretz, and now I am going to destroy the world. And then he commands Noach to build his ark. And Noach and his sons were the only ones to survive this. He explains, Rak Noach ubana bechol asher ito bateva nitzlu mimei hamabul. Only Noach and his sons and anybody that was in the teva, in the ark, were saved from this flood. Uksheyatzu mehateva hutla alehem hamesima livnot et haolam min hayesod. Coming out of the ark after the flood, they were tasked to rebuild the world. Behakpada al sheva hamitzvot hayesodiot, through the 7 laws of Noah, shehena basis lemusar enoshi, which is the fundamental or the foundation of all human morality. Rak le'achar shema'arechet hamusar habesisit sheben adam lachavero tibane karaui, and only after this system of proper ethics between man and his friend can be built properly. יוכל האדם להמשיך להתעלות ביחסיו המוסריים כלפי בעלי חיים. Only then can man continue that once upon a time relationship that they had with animals or other living creatures. לשם כך, because of this, היה צורך לקבוע גבול ברור בין האדם שנברא בצלם אלוהים לבין בעלי החיים. There needed to be a distinct separation, a boundary, a border between man, who was created in God's image, with animals or living creatures which were not created in God's image. Why is this so? כדי להדגיש את ייעודו ואחריותו של האדם, in order to express the purpose and responsibility of man, שרק עליו מוטלת המשימה לתקן את העולם ורוממו, because it's only on him, only on mankind, that has the task to repair and rectify the world and bring it up to its once elevated state. הביטוי המובהק לכך שלאחר המבור הוטל לבני אדם לאכול בשר בעלי חיים. What came as a result, as a consequence, is that man was now allowed to consume flesh, animals, toch azara chamura, but with that, through a very, very strict warning, shelo lirtzoach adam shenivra b'tzelem Elohim, that man is not allowed to murder another man. So you could kill an animal in order to eat it, but you cannot kill another person. Shneimar, as the pasuk says again in Parshat Noach, vayvarech Elohim et Noach v'et banav, that God blessed Noach and his sons. Vayomer lahem, and he said, Peru urvu milu et haaretz, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Umorachem v'chitchem yihye al kol chayat haaretz ve'al kol of hashamayim, and your fear will be upon all the birds of the earth. B'chol asher timos ha'adama, anyone that crawls throughout the land. Uvchol degeh hayam b'yedchem nitanu, and all the fish of the sea. Kol remes asher hucha yeh lachem le'ochla, again, any remes, any creeping crawler, you can eat. Keyerek esed natati lachem et kol, just like the vegetation, I give you all. Ve'ach et imchem lenafshotechem edrosh, shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech, ki b'tzem Elohim asa et ha'adam. The only thing that you have to take care of is not to kill or draw the blood of a fellow human being, because ki b'tzem Elohim asa et ha'adam, this human being is created in the image of Hashem. Tzarich leosif, he writes that I must add the following point. Shebe'ikvot chatei Adam harishon ve'adorot shekadmu lemabul, that as a result of the sins of Adam and all the generations that preceded the flood, ma'arachot hateva hitmotetu, all nature and the way nature was supposed to be, the stages of nature collapsed. Hatzomeach shuv lo hispik lekiyumo shel Adam. And the truth be told, he writes, someach, which is vegetation, things that grow from the ground, was not enough to keep man sustained. Kilomar, hanefila musarit hovila le'etzirat masav ekologi chadash, that the ethical downfall that took place before the flood created a new ecological system, shebo bnei adam muchachim le'echol basar, to the point where man needs to eat meat. Now, even though this is not ideal, the necessity can't justify it. Because Noach was solely responsible for sustaining the animals during the flood and keeping them alive, so as a reward, let's call it, Noach would be allowed to eat and take part from the eating of the meat in order that he can survive. B'matzav hanochachi, in our current state, im nechtal machilat basar, if we all hold back from eating meat, lo barur shadavar yativ im otam minim she'anu regilim le'echol mibesaram. Not necessarily is this going to be good for the animal world. Mipnei she'im lo namshich legadelam ulharbotam letzorchei achila. If we do not continue to raise animals properly in order that we can eat them, misparam yikaten meod. Their numbers, the numbers of the species, will diminish very rapidly. Sheken kayom hem mitrabim meod be'ashkahat adam. The reason why we have so many cows and sheep and so on and so forth, all these animals that we eat, is because humans are taking care of them. They're breeding these animals and they're multiplying at very, very rapid paces. However, if human beings would just say, okay, we're no longer eating meat, we're not going to take care of the animals, we're going to let the cows run wild and the chickens run wild and the sheep run wild and all the other types of food run wild, what's going to end up happening? You're going to see all the beasts of the land will come and devour these animals, and we're not going to have many of them. That number will diminish tremendously. So this is the end of part one, where so we clearly explained that yes, once upon a time, that's what it was. We were supposed to be vegetarian, but as a result of the sins, we needed to separate ourselves from the Balei Chaim, from the living creatures, to make that geder. And not only that, physically, we require the meat to sustain us, and as well as some sort of sachar, reward for Noah keeping the animals alive. So therefore, Hakadosh Baruch Hu allowed us to eat the meat after the flood, which was not the case before the flood. In part two of the section, he asks, Ha'im ra'ui lechanech letzimchonot? Should vegetarianism or veganism be something that we should preach? Is this something that we should train and educate our family, or something that we should do in our homes? Katav Maran Harav Kook. He quotes the famous tzaddik Rav Kook, שאומנם לפי האידאל השלם היה ראוי לאדם שלא לאכול בשר בעלי חיים. Really, like we said, according to the first ideology that we mentioned in the beginning, man should not be eating meat. אך לפי רמתנו המוסרית הנוכחית, אין לעודד אנשים להימנע מאכילתו. However, based on our current status and where we are right now, one should not encourage others to stop eating meat. Because after the flood, like we said, now that we can see how low a person is able to fall and deteriorate to such very, very basement levels, the Torah wanted to direct mankind to his or her ultimate purpose, and that ultimate purpose is to repair and rectify the relationships that man has with his fellow man. Sheken barur, for it is very clear, there is a difference between the level of closeness to Hashem of man versus that of Balei Chaim, of living creatures. Because man was created in the image of God, and he has wisdom, and he has a mind, and he has knowledge, and he has feelings. And therefore, if God forbid something happens or a sin takes place, something he does wrong, he feels it immediately. And when man acts with another one with defense and with love, the fact that I am friendly, the fact that I say hi and smile and act with chesed and kindness to my fellow, this actually causes the Geulah to come. It helps bring Mashiach. Therefore, in order to express this main idea of the mitzvah, that you should love your friend like yourself, and again, also the mitzvah that what is hated to your fellow, don't do it to your friend. The Torah is telling us you can push this idea aside, the idea of refraining from eating meat, and focus on your connection between man and his friend. Says the Rav Kook, a person is allowed to slaughter animals in order to eat it. Like the rabbi said in the Gemara Masechet Kiddushin, you should know that all living creatures were created solely for the purpose of serving man. And based on where we are today in our levels in connection of Hashem, that also means that we can partake in eating from these animals. Yoter mizeh, more than this, if what would happen have we just put our entire efforts not in the love and care and kindness for our fellow man, but if we directed that only towards animals and ignored our fellow man, something bad would happen. במקום להוסיף טובה לבעלי החיים, היינו הורסים את יחסי המוסר שבין בני אדם. You would be destroying any type of relationship between your fellow man, because all you care about are living creatures. שכן אותם אנשים שהמוסר אינו מפותח אצלם כראוי, היו אומרים בליבם, all these people where their ethics are not as developed would be saying, הואיל ממילא איננו נזהרים מהריגת בעלי חיים מאכילתם, since we don't care anyways from killing living creatures and eating them, so we'll just go and kill a regular man as well. Who cares? Let's just do whatever we want. And who knows, maybe even eat from the flesh of human beings. And there are people in this world, unfortunately, that have such low ethics that don't care about anything, and they care only about animals or whatnot, or maybe even not that literally they will do anything they want to human beings, as we see clearly in the world, certain rasha'im, certain wicked people that will stop at nothing to make the lives of humans miserable, or and even to the point of killing them and butchering them. There are even other types of wicked men and women. They will turn all of their good features, all of their good midot, only towards animals. Because every wicked person has some sort of spark of goodness. If they're taking that little goodness that they have only towards animals, what are they going to end up doing? They don't have any good left, because the only good that they have is towards the animals. So it will cause them now to go steal from people, or to deceive others, or even, like we said, murder. A person should not encourage other people not to eat meat. We can say, since as long as there are people in the world that have a ta'ava, that have a desire to eat meat, it's just a sign that we haven't reached the level that we're supposed to reach. Which what he's implying now is that there will be a time where, if the Jews do, or the world gets to the point where they're supposed to, where the connection, the relationships between one another is so high, they won't have any more ta'avot, desires to eat meat. And then we know that at that point we can revert back to the old system where we can focus only on eating etz hasadeh, the fruits and the trees, the vegetation. That's what he addresses now. In the future, ha'olam kulo yitromem. What's going to happen? The whole world will rise to much higher levels. The rabbis in Kabbalah would say, that all living creatures are going to reach the level like human beings, to the point that they're going to be able to speak. And even what you will see, the ethical code amongst mankind and humans will change. Of course, he quotes now the famous psukim, the famous verses in the book of Yeshayahu, where he describes what is going to happen in the end of days, in the times of Mashiach. It's a haftarah that we read on the 8th day of Pesach. Vegar ze'ev im keves. The wolf is going to live with the lamb. V'namer im gedi. And the leopard with the kid, yirbat, will lie. Ve'egel uchfir umri yachtav. You have the lion cub and the calf and the fatling together. Ve'nar kato noegbam. And a small child leading lions. Upara badov tir'ena. And the cow and the bear will graze together. Yachtav yibetzu yalven. Ve'aryeh kabaka yochal tever. And the lion is going to start eating grain. All these things which are not normal today is going to happen in the days of Mashiach. The child, the baby, will look through the hole of the snake, and he's going to stretch his hand into the eyeball of the adder, and nothing will happen to him. There will be no destruction and no evil throughout my holy mountain, because everyone will be filled, all animals and human beings will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, just like the water covers the oceans. So we see from here, we see that it's not appropriate to kill any type of creatures. And it's not, and there should be no ta'ava to actually eat from the basar. That's going to happen in the future. until that point where we do have these desires to eat from the meat, then we can continue eating from the meat and shechting them. And he quotes pasuk in Hosea, "V'charati lahem berit bayom hahu imchayat hasadeh ve'imof hashamayim ve'remes adama." I will make a covenant on that day. There will be no more sword. There will be no more war in the end of days, as everyone will live in peace. And that concludes the second part of this chapter. We're going to do one more part. I'm trying to keep it around the half an hour shiur per class. And this third part in this chapter is called Mitzvat Achilat Basar B'Shabbatot U'Seudot Mitzvah. And he writes, Mitzvah lechol basar b'Shabbatot v'yamim tomim. He says it's a mitzvah to eat meat on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Sheken mitzvah min haTorah leit'aneg b'Shabbat v'lismoch b'Yom Tov. The Torah actually mandates us to be, to enjoy Shabbat and Yom Tov. V'rov ha'anashim mit'anegim u'smechim b'achilat basar. And many people, they attain this happiness and this joy through the eating of meat. בזמן שבית המקדש קיים, אף הייתה מצווה לאכול מבשר הקורבנות. In the days of the Bet HaMikdash, this mitzvah was performed through the korbanot that you sacrifice, korban chagiga. Before each holiday, you would come and you would partake from that meat. L'chora yesh makom lishon. He says, there's a question here that we need to address. Keitzad achilat basar. How is it possible that the eating of meat, she'ayta asura al pi hadi'al harishoni, which we just spent the last 20 minutes talking about how this was something that was prohibited at the start of creation. Havcha mitzvah. How could that have turned to a mitzvah? The simple answer is, since, again, our ethical conduct has changed over the millennium, there is no ethical problem of eating meat nowadays. And now that we have a commandment to be sameach, to be happy, on Shabbat and Yom Tov, achilat habasar mesamachat, and eating meat brings that happiness. Memela mitzvah leochlo. Therefore, we have a mitzvah to eat it on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Hosifu chachmei Kabbalah ube'eru. The Kabbalistic rabbis added and explained. Given our current circumstances, there's a value in eating meat. Because of our sins, or the original sin from Adam Harishon, the world descended from its ma'ala, from its high level. Hadomem, hatzomeach, hachai, v'amedaber, kulam naflu mimadregatam, v'gam nitarev bahem ra. Now he gets a little bit deep here. He says there are four types of elements in not in the creation, but there's domem. Domem are the stationary objects such as a rock. Tzomeach are like we said, greenery, or things that grow from the ground. Chai is one step higher, which is the living creatures that are alive, and the highest creature is the medaber, which is the human being that is able to talk. And all of them have fallen from their original state to lower levels as a result of that sin of Adam Harishon. So now, look how he explains. Beautiful chidush, he says. V'kasher Yisrael ochlim mi besaram shel ba'alei chayim, hapi klalei hilchot kashrut. When the Jewish people eat from the meat of animals that, according to the laws of kashrut, mitoch kavana leitchazek ba'avodat Hashem, with the intent to connect ourselves to Hashem, hara shebabasar nifrad me'atov. Anything that was evil, that was ra in the meat, gets separated, ve'yosek kipsolet, and gets thrown away. Ve'atov shebo, and all the good that remains in the meat, mitalev v'nispag begufam, now gets absorbed and swallowed in our bodies. Ve'noten lahem koach la'asot masim tovim. The goodness of the meat, the good sparks that are found in that basar, allows us to perform our holy service to Hashem. And that is the way, in fact, it works for all types of things. Ve'kachu seder hatikun. Hatzomeach yonek et mezono min hadomem. The vegetation, what grows, is able to draw out its sustenance from the domem, from the stationary. And that elevates the domem, the stationary, to the level of the tzomeach. And when the animal eats from the vegetation, that elevates the tzomeach, the vegetation, to the level of chai, of living creatures. וכאשר בני אדם אוכלים מן החי, and when people eat from the animals, ומנהגים במוסריות ודבקים בהשם, and thereby clinging to God, בשר בעלי החיים מתעלה למדרגת אדם. That now, that meat elevates itself to the level of מדבר, of a mankind. וכך על ידי סולם המזון מחזירים את כל העולם אל מדרגתו הראשונה, and through that ladder, the food actually allows us to go one step at a time higher. ובמיוחד נעשה תיקון באכילת בשר בסעודת שבת ביום טוב ושאר סעודות מצווה כשמחת חתונה וברית. He goes, you should know most specifically when is it that we have this concept of raising the meat to the level of the medaber, to the level of mankind, specifically on the seudot of Shabbat and on Yom Tov and all other seudot mitzvot, such as a brit milah or a wedding. שאז הבשר נעשה שותף לשמחה של המצווה ומסייע בקיומה. Because the meat itself takes part, there's a partnership now in that simcha shel mitzvah and helps it keep it sustained. And that's why it's so important. You go to these functions and these smachot of weddings and brit milah and Shabbat. It's so important to have basar, to have meat, as to mesameach a person, but more than that, you're elevating its stature. Aval beseudot reshut, however, stama seuda, like your Sunday barbecue in your backyard or birthday party bash. Amru chachmei Kabbalah, the rabbis, the Kabbalistic chachamim said, shelo tamid nase tikun. That doesn't necessarily rectify anything by you having meat during those times. Because if a person is not behaving the way he's supposed to when he's having that meat at these birthday parties and barbecues, and therefore the meat you're having is not taking part, not having any partnership in its elevation process. ישנם חסידים שנמנעים מאכילת בשר בסעודות רשות. You will find many pious individuals who will choose not to eat meat when it's not a seudat mitzvah, meaning when they go, they won't go to a barbecue, or they'll go to a barbecue and they'll have salads, or they'll have French fries or something like that, but they won't partake in meat because being that it's not a seudat mitzvah, they will not elevate any of that meat to its level. Because again, they're worried that they're not going to elevate this meat the way it's supposed to be. He does have an interesting note, and with this we'll conclude. Because of this, the Gemara, we can understand the Gemara Masechet Pesachim that says, Mitzad Musar, ethically speaking, Asur le'am haaretz rasha le'chol basar. The Gemara says that it's prohibited for an ignoramus, evil, wicked person to eat meat. That's what Gemara says. Why is it so? Because since this wicked person has no Torah and he has no good deeds, and he hates rabbinical scholars or any people that are close to God, he has no part whatsoever in uplifting this meat to the level where it's supposed to be. Why should this person have an animal killed and slaughtered for him to eat when there is nothing spiritual happening to this meat? Aval b'Shabbat. However, when it comes to Shabbat, different. Gam ameh haaretz she'ochlim basar mekayimim mitzvah. Even if you have an ignoramus and he eats meat on Shabbat, he is fulfilling a mitzvah. Because he's uplifting this meat, umetaknim oto, and rectifying it, bringing it back to its original purpose. So what we see from here is very clear that everything that we do, especially when it comes to something so physical as eating, there's always a godly element and a spiritual element towards it, and most importantly, especially on Shabbat and Yom Tov. So if anything to walk out of here, this class, B'ezrat Hashem, is do whatever you can on Shabbat, Yom Tov, Brit Milah, weddings, to have meat, to be mesameach. The day brings you simcha, and it doesn't have to be a lot. If a person does not like meat for whatever reason, but he doesn't mind eating it, so just take a little bit, just have a little fork of some meat in order to fulfill this concept, because you are doing much more than just satiating yourself. You are taking the good of this meat and bringing it up to the original levels that it was meant to be. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm happy you were here. I hope you enjoyed it. B'ezrat Hashem, we're not done this chapter with regards to vegetarianism. We have a few parts left, which are B'ezrat Hashem we will complete next week. Wishing everyone a wonderful night. Be well.